investigation for child trafficking, and lawyers have tried to serve him 27 times in the last 4 months, but no one knows where he is. The charges come from 3 victims who claim that Miscavige forced them to work on boats as children after they were also forced to sign a $1 billion contract. In Scientology, they consider you to be an adult at 6 years old. One of the victims also claimed that after her mother left Scientology, the victim was forced to stay in a closet for 48 hours. All of this, of course, also comes after Shelley Miscavige, David's wife, has not been seen since 2007. Even though recently it's been reported that she might be living in Big Bear, California.
Scariest medical mistakes that will make you terrified of going to the hospital. After losing her mom to breast and ovarian cancer, 36-year-old Alicia underwent medical testing to find out if she carried the genes for these same cancers. The test results showed that she was extremely likely to develop the same cancers that took her mother's life, so she went in to get her breast, ovaries, and uterus removed. A few weeks later, she went to a different doctor and learned that all the tests were actually negative and she had all those surgeries for nothing. A 73-year-old man named Sherman Sizemore underwent a surgery to find out the cause of his abdominal pain. But unfortunately, he experienced what's called anesthesia awareness, meaning that he felt every bit of pressure and pain that occurred during the first 16 minutes of his operation. Following the procedure, he experienced PTSD from the operation and thought people were trying to bury him alive, eventually causing him to take his own life.
Do you need a free, easy way to capture your gameplay? Introducing Outplayed. Record anything on your PC.
Here are some of the scariest fishing videos caught on camera. Part 1. In October of 2012, a fisherman named Dusty Harpool spotted 2 killer whales swimming together in Alaska. They appeared to be circling Dusty's boat, but he soon discovered that they were actually hunting down a nearby mother sea otter and her newborn pup. Unfortunately, the 2 killer whales had already eaten the baby sea otter, but the mother managed to escape by climbing aboard Dusty's boat. The killer whales swam right by while Dusty started the engine to his boat, allowing the mother sea otter to ride away to safety. But after she was safe, the mother otter begins crying out for her lost pup, who she knows will never return.
You're okay.
As you've probably already heard, an arrest has been made in the Idaho stabbing case. But now some really interesting information is coming out about the way the police caught who they believe the killer is. So pretty quickly after the tragedy, police were looking for this white Hyundai Elantra. It was seen near the crime scene as the tragedy was happening, but then it was also caught on a security camera speeding away right afterwards. And what car was found at Brian Kohberger's house in Pennsylvania? A white Hyundai Elantra. But police had been tracking this car for 4 days when they caught Brian. Apparently, Brian's father had flown out to Washington to meet him, and they drove the car home to Pennsylvania together. Up until this point, we didn't know at what point the police believed that Brian was a suspect, but now we know that they had been tracking his trip cross country. And prior to this, police had actually gotten a genealogical DNA hit that matched Brian's DNA to the crime scene. What this basically means is police collected all of the DNA that was found at the crime scene and put it through DNA sequencing that takes a long time, and were able to match most of the DNA to the 4 victims. But there was also DNA there that didn't make any sense. And when it was put through the genealogical sequencing, they got a hit on one of Brian's relatives. Pair that with the fact that when they went to check on him, he was driving the white Elantra cross country to his parents' house, and voila. If you're like me, you are not gonna like this guy by the end of the video. This man was just charged with 83 counts of attempted murder after he tried to take down an entire Alaska Airlines flight. And a reminder that if you have a dark curiosity, you'll love the podcast. So in late October, Joseph Emerson was flying from Washington to San Francisco, and he himself was an off-duty pilot, so they were letting him sit in this jump seat behind the pilots. But then all of a sudden, he got this dazed look in his eyes, and he just says, "I'm not okay." And he lunged towards these levers, which are the ones that cut the fuel to the engines. These cut the fuel if there's like a fire on the plane, and also they act as fire extinguishers. But if you pull them in the middle of a flight, you are not going to have a good time getting down. According to Emerson, he had not slept in the last 40 hours, and he had taken shrooms for the first time ever 48 hours prior to the event. He said he felt like he was in a dream, and pulling the levers was the one thing he could do to wake himself up. And a further investigation showed that he had his hand on the lever and he had pulled it about halfway. Luckily, the pilots and the flight attendants got him away from the levers before anything happened, and you can see where they diverted. But as he was being pulled out of the cockpit, he turned to a flight attendant and said, "You need to cuff me right now or it's going to get bad." Everyone was fine, and the passengers actually didn't even know what was going on until after the whole thing happened.
was sentenced to 50 years in prison at the mere age of 16. The truth is more shocking than you could ever imagine. My name is Noah Nay. Beneath a veneer of innocence hid a completely different story. Driven by the desire to join a gang, I was challenged to prove my courage and resolve. With that in mind, I committed an act that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of my life. In a stolen car, I headed to a girl's house, firing through the window and hitting her in the neck and shoulder. Fortunately, she survived, and I had achieved my goal. But my freedom was short-lived. After my arrest, I was placed in a juvenile detention center from which I escaped 3 days later. My escape was fleeting. Captured after 4 days on the run, I found myself back at the center. Refusing to submit to this detention, I began lashing out at the guards. Law enforcement quickly realized they were not dealing with an ordinary teenager, and an exceptional measure was imposed. I was tried as an adult and sentenced accordingly. So, do you think my sentence was fair? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories. I'm the youngest serial killer in the United States. I am Daniel LaPlante, and my name is etched in the criminal history of Massachusetts and the country. As a child, I was the outsider, the one other kids couldn't understand, the one who found solace in the silent world of insects. But this fascination took a dark turn, a path that led me to commit the unimaginable. It was in 1987, on a cold, starless night, when I entered Priscilla's home. She was sleeping, innocent, with an unborn child nestled inside her. I acted noiselessly, guided by impulses that even I didn't fully understand. What I did to Priscilla that night was more than a crime. It was an act of pure cruelty. Even after she stopped struggling, I couldn't stop. The blows fell, one after another, until silence returned. But the silence was shattered by the screams of her children, screams that only fueled the darkness within me. What I did next is a story that has haunted the nights of this small town for years. If you want to know how that horrific night ended for the unfortunate children in the next room, subscribe, like, and comment part 2. The continuation of my tale is even more shocking, and I am ready to share everything. Brace yourselves for the worst.
After pleading guilty to torturing their foster son, this couple's lawyer stated that it was simply due to the fact that they didn't have much parenting experience. Nicholas and Mackenzie Spencer are a married couple in their 30s from South Carolina. They had been living in Uganda after moving there in 2017 on humanitarian work. However, it turns out the couple have a disgustingly dark side. 5 years ago, they fostered 3 children from a Christian ministry. Sickeningly, they were arrested in December 2022 on charges of aggravated torture. According to police statements, the couple allegedly kept their 10-year-old foster son barefoot and naked throughout the day. They're accused of forcing the child to squat in an awkward position and making him sleep on a wooden plank without a mattress or bedding. They're believed to have had a camera monitoring him constantly and apparently kept him confined to a small room. This allegedly went on for 2 years. Shockingly, after the couple pleaded guilty, they were ordered to pay a $28,000 fine. The pair were also later charged with aggravated child trafficking and have been out on bail since pleading guilty. They spent a short time in prison, and it's reported that if they are able to pay this fine, they may not have to spend a single day longer. The couple's lawyer claimed that they weren't able to look after the child properly due to having no parenting experience. The poor child has been placed into a children's home. Another disturbing development in the case of the hundreds of bodies found rotting in a funeral home. If you haven't seen my previous video on this, the remains of nearly 200 people have been found at a funeral home in Penrose recently. The discovery was made after it was reported that there was an abhorrent smell coming from the building. The process has begun of identifying all of the bodies there, much to the distress of the loved ones. There are now some disturbing reports of worrying allegations. Now, many people were querying in the comment section of my original video on this case of how on earth did the families not know about this? Presumably, once a person receives a burial or a cremation, the family kind of knows what's happened to that person. They are either physically buried and the family can see that happening, or they receive the ashes. Now, a family member of one of the people who was being looked after by the funeral home believes that she was given fake ashes of her mother. The lady, reportedly named as Tanya Wilson, stated, "My mum's last wish was for her remains to be scattered in a place she loved, not rotting away in a building." Tanya and other families were allegedly given death certificates by the funeral home, which named crematoriums that had handled their loved ones. However, some reports state that the crematoriums didn't actually perform the cremations for the funeral home on the dates provided. A potential criminal investigation is still underway. Man rang police to admit to hiding his dead son's body in a freezer, and when police arrived and couldn't find it, they just left. After 11 a.m. on the 29th of October, police got a disturbing phone call. This was about a deceased person found in Bradford Drive in Huntsville, Alabama. Police attended the property and found the decomposed body of 19-year-old Logan Michael Halstead in a freezer outside. But this isn't the first time that police had been to the house. The new owners had bought the property in September and were in the process of cleaning it out to move in when they made the grim discovery. Now, the body is believed to have been in that freezer since August. It was at this point that police questioned the previous occupants couple, Michael and Karen Halstead. The victim is thought to be their son, and the pair have been charged with 1 count of abuse of a corpse. Disturbingly, the pair actually have 2 other children, twin boys, who are being looked after by professionals. Logan was reportedly disabled before his tragic death. An autopsy is currently being carried out, and dependent on the results, the parents may then be charged with murder. When questioned, Michael actually made a shocking revelation. Firstly, Michael stated that his wife Karen was unaware of this crime. It's alleged that Michael tried to hide Logan's body and wrapped him in blankets, plastic, and covered him in cardboard. The second shocking revelation is the fact that Michael stated he even called the police on the 11th of October and told them that he had hidden Logan's body. However, it seemed that he did such a good job of hiding the body that police were unable to find it. It's reported by multiple sources that police turned up, looked for it, but after being unsuccessful, they simply left.
This is Ghost Rider, one of the most gut-turning cartel execution videos explained. This is an infamous cartel execution video, and I don't recommend searching for it because it's definitely one of the worst. It took place in September 2020, and the victim's name is Ghost Rider, and he was apparently tortured for 3 days. And he was subjected to some of the worst acts of violence you will ever see. The video is about 2 minutes long, and it begins with Ghost Rider already in a horrible state. It appears his face has already been flayed, which means skinned, and what the killers do next is absolutely horrible. They get rubbing alcohol and pour it on his face, and keep in mind, his face has already been skinned, so just imagine the stinging pain. They then set Ghost Rider's face on fire, and his face is completely covered in flames, and is absolutely melting away right before your eyes. You hear the cartel members just laughing and mocking him as he burns and his face melts. Ghost Rider is letting out blood-curdling screams as the flames continue. The video then skips to later on in the day, or a couple days later. And Ghost Rider has been tortured and burned so severely that his whole head is basically just a red skull. There's no skin, there's no hair, there's no features, you can't even see his eyes. And after all of this, he is still alive. At the end of the video, they tell him to raise his head, which he does, which confirms he was still alive, and I have no idea how somebody can live through all of this. They then set his head on fire again to make him look like Ghost Rider with his burning skull. Apparently, the guy was nicknamed Ghost Rider because he would do the same thing to people that he caught, which was the reason they killed him in this exact way. This video is absolutely horrible and extremely gruesome. And it's in the same category as some of the worst videos like Funky Town, 3 Guys 1 Hammer, and much more. Whatever you do, don't go searching for this video because I guarantee you will regret it.
This is one missing persons case that haunts me. So right now you're looking at Roxanne Paltoff, and she's been missing from Texas since the year 2006. So to everybody that knew her, Roxanne was a very normal girl. She was living in Austin, Texas at the time, and she was only 18 years old when she went missing. So on the night of July 7th, 2006, Roxanne was staying right here at the Budget Inn in Austin, Texas. Now, according to everything that we know about this case, on that evening, Roxanne had a heated argument with her then boyfriend while she was in her motel room. People actually saw Lewis Walls, her boyfriend, there with her that night, and yes, they heard the argument through the walls. So after arguing with Lewis for a while, Roxanne eventually left the hotel room, only carrying her ID. And that was the last time she would ever be seen. Not only alive, but just seen in general. Nobody knows where she is. Suspiciously, all of Roxanne's personal items were left in the motel room. That includes her shoes, purse, wallet, cell phone, etc. And the call logs from Lewis's phone that evening are very suspicious. So after Roxanne went missing, Lewis placed over 300 different phone calls to different people that he knew. That included a phone call to an ex-girlfriend of his. And he told his ex-girlfriend that he was in a lot of trouble, but no one has ever figured out what the trouble he was alluding to really was. Now, in a weird twist, Roxanne's ID card was actually found in another man's wallet. The man with Roxanne's identification was not her boyfriend. He was a completely unrelated dude, but a few days after Roxanne went missing, he was accused of assaulting an exotic dancer. But those charges were eventually dropped as well. To this day, nobody has ever been able to locate Roxanne's body. They haven't heard from her. They have no idea what happened to her. It's almost as if she just vanished from that hotel room. And authorities in Texas are still looking for her. So if you've seen this woman and you have any tips, I highly urge you submit a tip to one of those lines listed above.
This kid hammered his parents to death just so he could throw a party. On July 16th, 2011, 17-year-old Tyler Hadley, who was on the right, bludgeoned his parents to death, put their bodies in the master bedroom, and then threw a massive party at his house. Shortly before 5 in the evening that day, the Florida-based high school student took his parents' cell phone. He then took 3 ecstasy pills and went to stand behind his mother while she was working on the family computer. He then beat her with a hammer again and again until she was dead. After hearing the mother's screams, Tyler's father rushed from the bedroom to the scene. Tyler and his dad then stared at each other for several moments before he did the same thing to his father. He spent 3 hours cleaning up the bloody mess, hid their bodies in the master bedroom, and then got ready to throw the party of his life. After murdering his parents, Tyler sent several Facebook messages to his friends, inviting them to his party. Since he had been grounded for days before this, his friends expressed concerns about whether or not his parents would let him have the party. And to that, Tyler said that they won't be home, and when they asked him about the possibility of them showing up during the party, he coldly replied, "They won't trust me." After this, he stopped at an ATM and then picked up some of his friends. Around 60 people came to his house, playing beer pong, drinking alcohol, smoking cigars. That night, Tyler told Michael Mandel, his best friend, that he had bludgeoned his parents to death with a claw hammer. He then took Michael to the master bedroom and showed him the bodies of his dead parents. After processing what Tyler had just told him and what he had just seen, Michael took this selfie, which is now completely infamous, thinking that he would never see his best friend again. Soon, the news of the crime spread, and Tyler was arrested the next morning. As a teen, Tyler was disturbed and had mental health issues. And his parents tried to help him by taking him to psychiatric help and mental health programs. Tyler had also committed crimes such as arson in the past and expressed a desire to die. In 2014, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for what he did. This case is absolutely sickening, and I can't imagine why or how somebody can do this to their own parents.
Pop, look at that, mate. Look at that. Pop. Look at that.
This is one of England's most
Pop, look at that, mate. Look at that. Pop. Look at that.
This is one of England's most disturbed men, Robert Napper, a serial killer and pedophile. Robert Napper was born in 1966 and he had a very troubled childhood. He often witnessed his dad beat his mom and his parents divorced when he was only 9 years old. When he was 13 years old, his personality completely changed after Robert was assaulted by a family friend on a camping trip. He became introverted, obsessively tidy, and reclusive, and was also known to spy on his sister naked while she was in the bathroom. So apparently in 1986, Robert's own mother called into the police and reported that her son had sexually assaulted a woman. Apparently, he had raped a 30-year-old woman in front of her children and had gotten away with it, but admitted the crime to his mother. So eventually, Robert Napper was suspected of being the Green Chain Rapist, a serial rapist who committed over 70 crimes against women in a 4-year span. And something disgusting about Robert is that he would pick women to assault who had their kids with them. One woman in particular, for example, was wheeling her 2-year-old child in a baby carriage when Robert viciously raped her. But eventually, Robert would need to feed the bloodlust that was brewing inside of him. So on July 15, 1992, Robert went on the hunt. He visited the Wimbledon Common, a large open green area in South London, and he came across young mother Rachel Nichol right here, who was with her 2-year-old son Alex. When Robert came across the pair, he stabbed Rachel 49 times in front of her own son and left her to die there alone in the forest with her son. So when the authorities came and found Rachel's body, apparently her son Alex was still clinging to her corpse, begging his mom to wake up. But it wouldn't be long before Robert would strike again. In November of 1993, Robert broke into the home of Samantha Bissett and stabbed her in the neck and chest, killing her instantly. He then proceeded to sexually assault her 4-year-old daughter, Jasmine, who had just watched her own mother get murdered, and then he smothered Jasmine to death with a pillow. After killing Samantha, he dragged her out into the living room and dismembered her body, and even took parts of her corpse home with him as trophies. Apparently, the crime scene photographer that was tasked with photographing this horrific scene was forced to take a 2-year leave from their job because it was so gruesome. Thankfully, though, Robert couldn't escape justice for long, and he was arrested the next year and charged with those crimes. However, it would be almost 12 years before he was finally found to be the killer of Rachel Nichol. Another man named Colin had actually been prosecuted already, though, for the murder of Rachel, and it wasn't until 2004 when that man was exonerated and it was revealed that Robert was the guy who had killed her in the forest on that day. So eventually, Robert was convicted of the murders, and he's now in prison for an indefinite amount of time. And even though some of the sexual assaults remain unsolved, the police say that it's more than likely Robert who carried all of these out. If you want to listen to more true crime stories like this, check out the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Murder in America, available on all streaming platforms.
This is One Man, One Ice Pick, one of the most messed up and sickening videos on the internet explained. The video that I'm about to explain is 11 minutes long, and I beg you to never look it up. On the left is Luca Magnotta, and on the right is Jung Lin. As the video begins, Jung Lin, the victim, is seen naked and tied to a bed with a blindfold on, while the killer Luca Magnotta is standing over him. The song True Faith by New Order is playing, and this video completely ruined the song for me. The video then jump cuts to Jung Lin lying motionless on the bed, and a bedsheet is placed over his head. Luca then enters the camera holding an ice pick and begins stabbing the victim repeatedly in the chest and stomach for over 1 minute straight. Luca then grabs the camera and holds it as a POV shot and shows all the stab wounds around the victim's body. There's no blood at all, which somewhat feels more unsettling, and this is because the victim's throat was slit off camera. We know this because Luca lifts the bedsheet from the victim's head. Still shooting in a POV style, Luca takes a kitchen knife and begins slicing into the victim's flesh on his right thigh and right arm. Luca then focuses the camera on Jung Lin's body, showing the full extent and brutality of the situation. The video then jump cuts again and shows the victim's head, which at this point has been severed. Luca places the head in a black box and plays with the severed head's hair for a couple seconds. Once again, the video jump cuts and Luca has the camera in one hand and the knife in the other. He starts to cut off one of the victim's arms at the shoulder, beginning the process of dismembering the victim's limbs. Luca cuts into the flesh for a while until the arm is half dismembered. He then drags the knife along the victim's back, causing severely deep slashes. Another jump cut happens, and at this point we see both of the victim's arms have been completely dismembered. Luca then picks up one of the severed arms and begins using the hand to pleasure himself. This is absolutely sick. At this point we get another jump cut and the victim's right leg is completely dismembered and the left leg has been half dismembered. A close-up is then shown of the victim's stump and you see his femur bone surrounded by flesh. The body is then turned over on its side, lying on its stomach. Luca then starts humping Jung Lin's body. Again, another jump cut happens and it shows Luca cutting off a piece of the victim's butt with a fork and knife. It's not shown on camera, but he 100% eats it. Luca then takes a small puppy who I assume has been starved and places it next to Jung Lin's body, and it then begins eating his right leg stump. Finally, the video jump cuts again, showing Luca pleasuring himself with one of the victim's severed arms, and the video then concludes. This whole video and case is absolutely sickening, and it's a very hard one to wrap your head around. There is also a Netflix documentary called Don't F with Cats that explains this whole case. I beg you to never go searching for this video because you will regret it.
The story of this American female serial killer will make your hair stand up. As if her crimes are not horrific enough, she earned the nickname the Giggling Granny. How creepy is that? Nanny Doss was raised on a farm by a very controlling father, and one of the few joys that she had in life was sneaking into her mother's room and reading her romance novels, and she would daydream about the day that she'd be swept off her feet and have her happily ever after. And she got married to her first husband at the age of 16, and it was a miserable marriage. The couple had 4 daughters together, 2 of which mysteriously died of food poisoning, at which point the husband took one remaining daughter and fled because he was scared to death of Nanny. The remaining infant baby named Florine was left with Nanny, and Nanny picked up and married somebody new. Now, this man was an alcoholic, but despite that, they were married 16 years and raised Florine together. This is where the bloodbath really begins. Nanny was in the room right after her daughter Melvina had given birth to her second grandchild. And while Melvina was still loopy from the labor drugs and she was exhausted, she could have sworn that she saw Nanny stick a hat pin in the baby's head. Melvina kind of passed out and went back to sleep, but when she came to, she started asking her family members, did Nanny have a hat pin and stick the baby in the head? And the family regretted to inform Melvina that the baby had in fact died, and yes, they did see Nanny holding a hat pin. However, the doctors couldn't give a positive explanation for the baby's death. The death of the baby absolutely shattered Melvina and her husband, and they started fighting and drifting apart, and Melvina started dating a soldier named Robert, who Nanny did not approve of. And one night when Melvina was out of the house and Robert was left alone with Nanny, Robert mysteriously died, and Nanny received $500 in life insurance that she had taken out on Robert a couple weeks earlier. Not long after that, Nanny's husband forced himself on her, and she didn't like that, so she put rat poison in his corn whiskey jar, and he died that night. Nanny married her third husband only 3 days after meeting him, and he died shortly after this of heart failure. She picked up some life insurance, bought some land, and built a new house. Her late third husband left behind a mother and a bedridden sister who also died shortly after. At this point, Nanny burned the house down, took that life insurance money, and moved on. Then Nanny landed a fourth husband, and at this point, her mom moved in with him. She found out that her husband was cheating, so she poisoned him to death, and for good measure, she poisoned her mom to death too. Then she married her a fifth man named Samuel Doss, who was very disapproving of the romance novels that she loved to read. He went to the hospital one night with flu-like symptoms and was diagnosed with a severe digestive tract infection. He was treated and sent home. And a few days later, he showed up dead. The doctors were very suspicious of this, so they did an autopsy and found enough arsenic in his system to kill 20 men. Nanny was arrested shortly after this and confessed to killing 4 of her husbands, her mother-in-law, her mother, her sister-in-law, and yes, sadly, even the baby with the hat pin. I spent a weekend with one of the most notorious killers in Texas. So in my early 20s, I spent a lot of time in South Texas in women's prisons units, helping people find forgiveness and second chances at life. And on this one particular weekend, when we arrived, the correctional officers informed our team that there was a new inmate on the premises. She was only 17 years old and had been tried and convicted as an adult for a very violent crime. And because I was the youngest person on our prison team, they voted me to be the one to work with her because she was young, I was young, and she might relate to me and open up to me. Now, I had a rule for myself when I worked with these women to never look up their crimes. I didn't want it to affect my judgment about them or to affect my willingness to help them, so that was just a rule that I always kept. So the correctional officers, they walked me down this long corridor into a classroom where sitting at the table was Erin Caffey. Now, Erin Caffey is a tiny, tiny thing. Now, I'm a tiny person, and I dwarfed her. She's very small, very timid, very soft-spoken, rarely will look you in the eye. And my first thought whenever I lay eyes on her and I sit down across from her is, how can somebody this small and this timid possibly be convicted as an adult for a violent crime. What violence is she possibly capable of? Little did I know. We started talking and we kind of started to get to know each other a little bit, cracked a few jokes. I tried to get her to lighten up. And eventually she did start kind of opening up to me, and she started volunteering some details about her version of what had happened the night of her crime. And I have to admit, even though I had a rule to really try not to know what people had done, I was very curious because, again, here's this tiny little thing. She's 17 years old, looks scared to death, and she's in this facility. And well, her version of the events that took place the night of the crime led me to believe that she was a victim in all of it and that it was really out of her hands. She couldn't stop it, and she's haunted by it, regrets it every day of her life, and she just wishes she could take it all back. And y'all, she was so convincing, just absolutely convincing, that I truly believed that she was innocent. She had somehow gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd, was wrongly convicted. And I started brainstorming in my head, like, how can I raise awareness about this and help her get out? Little did I know, in my naivety, that this young lady was a psychopath. She was very cunning, very manipulative, and the small, mousy, timid, soft-spoken thing was very much a calculated tactic to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And my time with her started a long season of my life of panic attacks and nightmares, and I'm going to tell you more about that in part 2.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew, part 2. In its natural habitat, a blowfish isn't actually ugly. This is one 3,000 feet below sea level. But this is one after extreme tissue damage after being pulled up rapidly by a fisherman. Men who are hanged get what is called a death erection, which I'm assuming is pretty awkward for the family. There's a parasite that enters a fish's mouth, eats the tongue, and replaces itself as the new tongue. Blue-eyed people are statistically more likely to suffer from depression and alcoholism. Sometimes an Amber Alert causes the kidnapper to panic and kill the child immediately. Every year you live through the future anniversary of your death. CNN has a pre-recorded broadcast for the end of the world. A man and his wife had just moved into a new house a couple miles away from their previous home. One night while the wife was away, the husband saw a figure approaching the front porch. It was a tall, middle-aged man with a menacing smile. He introduced himself as Damon and welcomed the man to the neighborhood. Damon then asked him if he had a shovel or a spade, because he was starting a garden and didn't have the necessary tools. The man thought it was a little late for that, but he didn't want to seem rude, so he got out his shovel and offered to help. They both dug for several hours, when eventually the man asked Damon why they were digging so deep. It was at this moment that Damon took a rag out of his pocket and held it against the man's face. He attempted to fight back, but eventually he began to slip out of consciousness. The last thing he heard was, "Shh, go to sleep." He later woke up in a tight, confined space. He then realized that he had been digging his own grave.
May 20th, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Christina Kettlewell was found 150 feet away from her honeymoon cottage. Her remains were found in just 9 inches of water on the banks of a river in Severn Falls, Ontario. 8 days prior, Christina had eloped with 26-year-old war veteran Jack Kettlewell. Jack had a friend named Ronald Berry who strangely joined them on their honeymoon. During this time, it was reported that Christina started to act out of character. She seemed dazed, would go into crying fits, and questioned Jack's love for her. On May 20th, Christina disappeared and Ronald's cabin mysteriously caught on fire. Ronald allegedly returned to the cabin to find a disoriented Jack with a head injury and pulled him out of the flames, but Christina couldn't be found. Christina's body was free from burns and an autopsy found traces of codeine in her stomach, but her death was declared a drowning. Jack claimed to not remember anything past 11 a.m. that day. The police report claimed that there were signs and evidence that Christina was very upset by the unnatural conduct of her husband and Ronald. And despite possible theories, including that Christina took her own life, the case remains unsolved.
A man was stabbed after helping a man who had broken down on the side of the road. A kind man from Missouri named Dr. Patton stopped his car on September 29th. He had noticed there was a stranger in need of his help. The man in need of help was 28-year-old Tyler Risler. He had approached Doctor and asked him for a lift. He told him his car had broken down and he needed a ride back to Target. Happy to do the good deed, Doctor obliged and gave him a lift. However, when the pair started driving down the road, Tyler reportedly started acting odd. He decided at first to change the direction of where they were going and then tried to take control of the car. He allegedly began threatening Dr. with a knife. Thinking quickly, Dr. decided to take the key out of the ignition and try and slow the car down. He tried desperately to get out of the car, but Tyler stabbed him in the chest. Luckily, he ran to a neighbor's house and the neighbor chased Tyler away with a shovel. The man was rushed to hospital and survived the attack, luckily. Meanwhile, Tyler jumped the fence of somebody's garden and threatened a woman and her 2 children. He allegedly stole their car and then was involved in a crash. Thankfully, Tyler was caught and arrested. He has a history of offenses, including assault on a law enforcement officer and robbery.
This is everything you should know about the mass shooting that just happened. Last night at 7 p.m. in the city of Lewiston, Maine, a man walked into a bowling alley called Just in Time and began shooting. The suspect, who we now know is 40-year-old Robert Card, drove from the bowling alley to the bar, which was 4 miles away, and began shooting again. At this point, there's 18 people deceased and 13 others were injured. Robert is still on the run, and police have advised everyone in the city to be careful and stay home. Now, what do we know about Robert Card? Robert's enlisted in the U.S. Army Reserve and has an active military ID. He's also been recognized a number of times with awards and medals while serving. But something that I should know is that back in July, the commanders in the Army Reserve were extremely concerned with Robert because he was just behaving erratic. They called police and he was evaluated and then put into a mental health facility for 2 weeks because he said that he was hearing voices in his head that was telling him to shoot up the military base. Which, I'm no specialist or anything, but 2 weeks in a mental health facility to help someone who's having these kind of thoughts, I don't think that's enough time. What's absolutely devastating is that one of the victims last night who worked at the bar was fatally shot when he tried to attack the shooter with a knife. Robert's family has been working with police and investigators to find Robert, and they've asked him to surrender.
This is by far one of the worst murders in American history. This is the Watts family, and in the early hours of August 13th, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts murdered his pregnant wife Shannon by strangulation, and right after this, he murdered his 2 young daughters who are 4 and 3 by smothering them with a pillow, all while they begged their dad not to kill them. He then buried Shannon in a shallow grave near an oil storage facility, and he then dumped his 2 children's dead bodies into an oil tank. Christopher Watts initially maintained his innocence in his family's disappearance, but was arrested on August 15th after confessing in an interview with detectives to murdering Shannon, and he then later admitted to murdering his children. He did this because he wanted to run away and start a new life with the girl he was cheating on his wife with. And he thought the solution to this was to kill his entire family. There's also this clip of him being interviewed by some news outlet, and in the video, he's begging for his wife and children to come back. Now, at this point, nobody has any clue that he killed them, but he does. He remembers exactly what happened. He knows that they're dead. He knows how he killed them, and he's still on live TV begging them to come home, saying he can't live without them. Just watch this clip. It's absolutely sickening.
My last question, if you have any of those, feel free to step in. My last question, if your wife can see this, if she can watch these movies, what would you like to tell your wife and your kids?
Shannon, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring her back.
That's it. I can take that mic off.
Do you know about the Club Penguin dark criminal network? Born in 2005, Club Penguin was a massively multiplayer online game involving a frozen virtual world. Fans of the game will know that it included loads of online games and activities. However, when the site shut down in 2017, it broke the hearts of many Club Penguin fans. The site made its money off paid memberships, but due to the site's declining popularity, not enough revenue was being generated. This spurred on fans to create unofficial websites all across the world. These were extremely popular when COVID hit and boredom was at an all-time high, with many people quarantining. People looked to these nostalgic websites as a way to pass the time. The largest of these was called Club Penguin Online. However, what was going on behind the scenes was dark and criminal. Bearing in mind that the original demographic of Club Penguin was ages 6 to 12. The copies of the website were still branded as child-friendly, but they were actually anything but. The activity that was going on was shocking, and Disney, the original creators of Club Penguin, actually stated that what was going on was abhorrent and illegal. The official Club Penguin was closely watched and moderated to maintain child safety. The unofficial versions of Club Penguin, however, were definitely not a safe space for children. Conversations relating to substances, racism, users being toxic and bullying each other, and even having conversations about S. It was a hive of online predators asking children inappropriate questions and asking them to join private online servers. There also grew a huge rivalry between people who were creating different versions of the Club Penguin website. It got so bad that individuals were getting hackers involved, threatening people, and even exposing their private details online. Shockingly, a British man who was heavily involved in the Club Penguin online website was actually ultimately arrested over allegations of child P. This is the UK's most famous missing boy. In September 2007, Andrew Gosden was just 14 years old. He was a very intelligent boy and was top of his class in most classes at school. He was an introvert that usually spent most of his time at home. The day before Andrew went missing seemed completely normal. He went to school, he had some tea, and then he watched some TV. However, on September the 14th, he seemed more irritable than normal. Instead of getting the bus to school that morning like his parents thought he was, he went to a cash point and withdrew £200. CCTV then captures him walking home, where he changed his clothes into a Slipknot t-shirt. When he left the house, he didn't take his charger with him, and he also didn't take £100 that he'd saved up. He didn't take his passport, but he did take his house key, which indicates he was going to come home. He bought a one-way ticket to London and was last seen leaving King's Cross station at about 11:30. Frustratingly, the school had actually tried to contact Andrew's parents to say that he hadn't turned up to school that day, but they dialed the wrong number and left an answer phone message on the wrong phone. His family was completely cleared of any suspicion, and the family and the school and all of the students went to London and they were handing out loads of flyers. Weirdly, a year after this incident, a man came to a police station to say that he had information about Andrew. Now, the police station was unmanned, so the person spoke to this man just over an intercom system and sent a police officer down there. Mysteriously, by the time the police officer arrived, the person had vanished. This is what Andrew might look like now, just being the age that he may be if he's still alive. Theories about this case is that he may have gone to London to meet up with someone or go to a concert. Was he lured there by somebody with bad intentions, or was he just going there for the day, gonna come back, and was at the wrong place at the wrong time and somebody did something bad to him? In 2009, the family paid for a search of the River Thames to try and find some sort of closure. The search did find a body, but it wasn't Andrew's. The most up-to-date information that we have on this case is that 2 men were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Andrew, but they've actually been released.
A killer has now been identified in the brutal slayings of siblings Karen and Gordon Alexander. They were killed over 4 decades ago, and police now believe the killer was their own father. Sadly, he'll never face a judge and jury for the murders of his children, as he passed away in 2014. He literally got away with murder. Weldon Alexander called emergency services on the morning of April 8, 1981, to say that he'd just got home to find his 13-year-old son dead on the kitchen floor and his 14-year-old daughter in her bed, barely breathing, with a butter knife sticking out of her chest. He said that he'd pulled the knife out of her chest and called an ambulance. She was rushed to hospital, but sadly she could not survive her injuries. Both Karen and Gordon had been stabbed multiple times. Detectives examined evidence, identified witnesses, and followed multiple leads, but there was no DNA testing back then, and the case soon went cold. Sadly, Karen and Gordon's mother Nancy was in hospital at the time of the murders, and tragically she took her own life just 3 years after their deaths, and Weldon simply went on with his life. There was one patrol officer who never gave up on this case. Calvin Seward, despite being retired, was given permission last year to reopen the case in Arkansas. Over the last 18 months, he's re-interviewed dozens of people and sent off forensic evidence for analysis. And finally, a killer has been revealed. Bodily fluids found on Karen's bedding were matched to that of the DNA of her father, Weldon. Sickeningly, she was raped shortly before her murder, and police now believe that her brother Gordon had heard Karen fighting off Weldon, and he'd come to try and protect his sister, and he paid with his life.
Weldon had then stabbed Karen multiple times and then left for work. He'd then returned the next morning and called police saying that there'd been a break-in and his children had been stabbed. It's just a shame Weldon Alexander is no longer alive to face up to his crimes. Had he been alive now, he'd be facing life in prison for 2 counts of capital murder.
This rapper murdered his roommate and ate her face. I'm not kidding, this is a really disturbing story, so viewer discretion is advised. So this is Anton Singleton, aka Big Lurch. He was born in 1976 in Dallas, Texas, and he started as an underground horrorcore rapper. So Big Lurch's rap career started with the group Cosmic Slop Shop. This is them. They released one album in the late 90s, and then the group disbanded. But Big Lurch had dreams of making it big, so he started pursuing a solo career. And things seemed to be really going up for him in his life. That is, until the day of April 10th, 2002. On that day, something snapped in Anton. At the time, he was living in an apartment with a woman named Tanisha and her boyfriend. And at some point during that day, Big Lurch murdered her. So when a friend eventually discovered Tanisha's body, they found that her chest had literally been ripped open. And there was a 3-inch blade lodged and broken off in her scapula. Upon further examination, teeth marks were actually found on her face, and teeth marks were also found on her lungs, which had been ripped out of her body and placed somewhere else in the apartment. So when this friend discovered Tanisha's body, they also discovered Big Lurch standing outside naked in the street, staring up at the sky, covered head to toe in blood. Obviously, he was arrested, but what they found afterwards made the story even more disturbing, if that's possible. When an analysis was done on Big Lurch's stomach contents directly after the murder, they found human flesh inside of his stomach. This meant that he had murdered Tanisha and actually ate her. I mean, this was just a horrific crime scene for investigators to process. So Anton was eventually sentenced to life in prison. The defense argued that he had smoked PCP the night before the murder and was in a state of psychosis. But since drug use cannot be the grounds for an insanity plea in California, he was still given the life sentence in prison. And eerily, this is just a really, really eerie coincidence. On his album cover, you can see him holding a plate with a human skull on it. This definitely seemed like a very bad omen of things to come in Big Lurch's life.
This is the ISIS child executioner video, one of the most sickening videos ever explained. Before I begin, this is a massive trigger warning. The video begins with the victim tied to some sort of fence with his arms up. He is inside of a ball pit, and then you see a child walk across the abandoned ball pit. And I mean child, this kid is no more than 6 years old, which is just mind-blowing. The child then stands next to an adult supervisor, and the adult then pulls out a pistol and cocks it and hands it to the child. The child then aims the gun at the victim's head and pulls the trigger, hitting him in the head. The first shot doesn't instantly kill the victim. You see blood leak out of his head and you see his eyes move around. The child then shoots the victim 3 to 4 more times, and at this point, the victim is dead. After this, the child raises the gun in the air and chants. The video then jumps to another execution, and it opens up with a young teenager holding up a knife. He then reads out a speech, and the video then skips to the execution, which is being done by the boy who just read the speech. The video briefly shows the victim. He has his hands tied behind his back and he's on his knees. The child executioner then kicks him on the back and he falls to the ground. The video then shows the toddler who did the prior shooting execution doing a cutthroat gesture. The teenage executioner then slits the throat of the victim, and as this is happening, there are various close-ups of the victim on the ground bleeding out and grimacing in pain. You can literally see the life leave his body, and like most ISIS executions, there is music playing over this. But you can briefly hear the victim making noises and the child slitting the throat. One thing I want to say is that these ISIS execution videos are shot in extremely high quality, unlike the Mexican cartel videos, which makes them very clear and disturbing. You almost have to remind yourself that it's real people because it literally is movie quality. This is by far the worst ISIS video out there, and not because of the gruesome nature, but because the killers are literally kids. The kid on the screen right now who did the shooting execution is literally a 6-year-old boy. I can't imagine the brainwashing these kids went through that ISIS done to them. And whatever you do, please never go searching for this video.
This is Christopher Westbrook, a TikTok famous chef that was always making recipes and dinner for the sorority house he worked at. Now, people online really seemed to like Christopher. He seemed like this fun-loving chef who cared a lot about the food he was making for these young women. But nobody would have ever seen what was coming next. In August of this year, Christopher was arrested for the possession of CP, meaning he's a hardcore pedophile. And in total, he was charged with possessing, distributing, and viewing CP materials. But this story only gets more and more disturbing. So once authorities got a search warrant for Christopher's belongings, they entered his house and they recovered a laptop and a hard drive. And what they found on that hard drive was nothing short of absolutely disturbing. They found over 700 images of children being abused. Yes, more than 700 images of CP were found on his devices. That is a lot. And to think that before this arrest, he actually had 150,000 followers here on this platform. That's a really big amount of followers, and he could have turned this into some sort of a career. That is, if he didn't make such a terrible, disgusting, deplorable decision. This all started in June of 2021 when the Center for Missing and Exploited Children alerted local authorities saying that there were some explicit images involving children being uploaded to an account on Google owned by this guy. And thankfully, authorities were able to sweep in, take this guy into custody, and get him off the streets. Now, a lot of people were actually really pissed at Christopher because just a week or so before he was arrested, he got on TikTok and was begging people for money.
This isn't a video that I want to make, I promise. But as most of you know, I work at a college.
So yeah, he was asking people for donations. I know a number of people donated quite a significant amount of money to this guy. And I don't know if the process has been started to get people refunds or what's going on with that, but I mean, I can't imagine the feeling of those people who donated thinking they were helping this lovable guy out, when in reality, they were donating to a hardcore, disturbed pedophile. Just goes to show once again that you can't really trust anybody on this app.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look at that.
Okay, this one's a little bit crazy. This is Kevin and Ruby Frank and their 6 children, and they basically rose to fame with their YouTube channel that documented their life. Ruby's now been arrested just 2 days ago on suspicion of child abuse. The family are from Springville in Utah, and they are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormon community. Their YouTube channel called 8 Passengers was launched in January 2015, and within 18 months they'd reached 1 million followers. And Ruby said that the channel was created as a way to feel present and to just enjoy being with the kids as they are right now. However, as their channel grew, viewers became a bit concerned about their parenting style, even describing them as cruel. In 2020, their son Chad actually had his bedroom taken away and was forced to sleep on a beanbag on the floor after playing pranks on his little brother. Other YouTubers then began looking at their past content and found some quite disturbing things. There was one video where 6-year-old Eve had forgotten to pick her own packed lunch up off the countertop, and Ruby refused to take it into school for her, saying it was her own fault. She wouldn't give the kids their breakfast until they'd done their chores, and she said that none of them deserved personal space. She would also regularly withhold meals when the kids were play fighting, just as normal kids do. There was then a petition set up for CPS to step in by people saying that they were profiting off their children and putting themselves first. Ruby and Kevin pushed back at this, saying that people were just trying to stir up drama and take clips out of context, and they said that they were giving their children choices and teaching them consequences of their actions. They continued to upload videos, becoming more sporadic and then eventually stopping, and in mid-2023, the YouTube channel was actually removed. In January 2022, Ruby announced that she was joining a new YouTube channel called Connections with a woman named Jodie Hildebrandt. Jodie is a therapist, but she actually had her license put on probation back in 2012. The punishment was actually for discussing a client's porn addiction at her Mormon church without his permission. This new channel caused concern with viewers straight away. Jodie actually said that women who were raped had a choice, and Ruby claimed that children don't deserve privacy or unconditional love. It wasn't long before Ruby's family began to break apart. Her oldest daughter, Shari, moved out in September 2022 and said that she does not support the extreme beliefs of their YouTube channel. Her eldest son, Chad, is also thought to have left the family home. It's unclear whether Kevin is still a part of the family, but it's been reported that he has left his job. And just 2 days ago, both Jodie and Ruby were arrested. Shockingly, the arrest came
Albion Online is a sandbox MMORPG in which
if you crack an egg and 2 yolks come out, it's like a sign that you could possibly be having a baby. A baby's in the future or a baby is coming. And the reason why I say this and why I know it's low-key true is because around the time where Abby found out that she was pregnant with Isabella, she kept cracking eggs and she kept telling me, why the fuck do I keep cracking the eggs and 2 yolks come out every single fucking time, bro? She got like 2 yolks at least 6 times, bro. Back to back, back to back.
Damn.
And around that time, like I said, she was having
Signs of being pregnant.
Exactly. Let me know if you guys have ever heard about that superstition.
I feel like it's probably just like a coincidence.
Yeah, it could just
hopefully it's a coincidence and like no fucking condom is broken or whatever.
These are people who killed animals reacting to their sentence. This is Alicia Concholi, and she burned a raccoon alive. And the most messed up part is she recorded the entire thing. I don't recommend watching the video at all because it is very disturbing. But what I'm about to show you is Alicia reacting to the sentence that she got for committing this awful and inhumane crime.
And the first video is of this raccoon, and I know you describe it as some nuisance or menacing animal, and all you see is this little raccoon face looking up at the screen. And when humans deliberately make animals suffer, there is a justifiable cause for concern. You sealed your own fate when it came to how the public will forever perceive you. You will not be allowed to own or possess any pets. You will need to surrender those within the next 30 days at this point. Oh, well, I'll tell you that. Your sentence is 45 days in the Sarasota County Jail. However, if you successfully perform 45 days on the Sheriff's Work Offender Program and complete that, I was going to make you do it in 180 days, and they can't coordinate that, so it's 315 according to their math. If you fail to complete that, you will automatically be arrested and sentenced without any further hearings.
Nothing scares me more than when someone vanishes into thin air. Hannah Kobayashi disappeared on November 11th after missing her flight at LAX. But before she disappeared, she sent a string of bizarre text messages. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance are strange, so let's talk about it. So on November 8th of this year, Hannah flew from her home in Maui to Los Angeles, and her plan was to then get on a connecting flight to New York to visit family and attend a concert. Hannah was super excited to go to this concert and to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She is an aspiring photographer and a really good one at that. She spent thousands of dollars on this trip well in advance, so she was super excited about it. But after landing at LAX, Hannah accidentally missed her connecting flight to New York. So to kill time while waiting for a last-minute flight to open up, she decided to go into downtown Los Angeles to sightsee. To be more specific, she went to the Grove Shopping Center, which is about 10 miles away from the airport. On November 9th, Hannah was seen at a bookstore called Taschin, and a day later, she attended a Nike event in the same area where she took this photo. She's also seen in the background of a YouTube video at the same event. On November 11th, Hannah's mom texted her asking if she had made it to New York yet, in which Hannah replied, not yet. This is when things start to get strange. Hannah's friends and family then began receiving a string of bizarre text messages from Hannah's phone. In one text to a friend, Hannah said that she got tricked into pretty much giving away all of her funds from someone she thought she loved. In another text, she said, quote, Z-Packers wiped my identity, stole all of my funds, and have had me in a mind since Friday. End quote. The last time anyone heard from Hannah was this final text. She said she had a spiritual awakening, was charging her phone, and then heading back to the airport to go to New York. She said she might need some help getting there, and then it's a long story, but she told her family that she was scared. After this, Hannah vanished, and no one has heard from her since. Her phone soon went dead, but what's odd is that her family and friends say that these last texts don't really sound like her. She was reportedly calling them hun and babe, which is something that she doesn't really ever say. Her final post on Instagram was the same day, and it was a photo she took at the Nike event the day prior. After a while of not hearing from Hannah and the odd text messages coming from her phone, her family reported her missing to the Los Angeles Police Department. During the investigation, police found that Hannah's phone last pinged at 4 p.m. on November 11th at LAX, which is the day she was sending those weird texts. But after this, her phone went dead. Adding to the mystery is the fact that before she disappeared, Hannah sent money via Venmo to two separate people who her family does not recognize. Recently, surveillance footage has emerged that shows Hannah the night she went missing, but it only brings more questions than answers. On the evening of November 11th, well after her phone died, Hannah was seen on security footage near the Crypto Arena, which is about 20 miles from the airport. Her family says that from that footage, it's clear that she wasn't in good condition. Hannah was then seen later that same night on security footage at the Hawthorne Lenox light rail station. She was not alone this time though. She was with an unknown man, and according to her family, she looked really tired and disassociated. It's not clear what happened to Hannah after this, and it's like she vanished into thin air, but her family believes that she's been abducted. The FBI is now involved in this case, and there have been multiple searches for Hannah, but she is still missing. Authorities are in the process of getting any extra security footage that they can find, as well as her phone records and bank statements. They're also trying to access all of her social media accounts to see if that can provide any clues into what happened to her. One thing that's important to note is that Hannah's ex-boyfriend was also traveling on that same flight from Maui to Los Angeles. They didn't sit together or even speak on the flight though, but he went because they'd already booked this trip prior to breaking up. He has reportedly been cooperative with authorities and Hannah's family, and he did board that connecting flight to New York that Hannah missed. I just wanted to point that out because it will come up when you research Hannah's case. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is that Hannah's family says that she doesn't suffer from any mental illness, and she's not on any medication that could possibly cause her to have an adverse reaction or anything like that. It's now been over a week since Hannah made any contact with her family, which is extremely out of character for her. She would never just leave her family like this. If you're in the downtown Los Angeles area or possibly even Skid Row or Compton, please keep your eyes peeled. These are some of her characteristics and what she was last seen wearing. You can also join this Facebook group to keep up with information directly from the family. If you have any information, please contact the number on the screen.
Captain, there are still 9 orders.
Looks can be completely deceiving, and the woman you just saw in that video hugging and loving on her child actually murdered her own daughter. So this is Nicola Priest and her then boyfriend Callum Redford. The two had been dating for a while, and they had to raise Nicola's daughter from a past relationship, a girl named Kaylee Jade Priest. Now, on the night that all of this happened, Nicola and her boyfriend Callum went to the bedroom to do stuff. But according to them, Kaylee, the daughter, did not want to go to bed. She wanted to stay up and play. So the two of them decided to abuse Kaylee to death. Kaylee, as it turned out, died from severe abdominal and chest injuries. Authorities claim that it looked like Kaylee's body had been hit by a car going 40 miles per hour. Injuries that were comparable to falling 3 stories onto a concrete floor. That's how horrific and violent this abuse and assault was. Nicola was very active on TikTok with her daughter, where she was trying to gain a following, constantly posting little videos of her daughter, saying how much she loved her, but it was all one big lie. Now, this will piss you off. Nicola got 15 years in prison, and Callum got 14 years in prison for the murder of Nicola's daughter. And as this happened 3 years ago, that means that they'll be out in about a decade, back into British society. I don't know why the UK's court systems are like this and why people like this keep, doing these things and are able to get out pretty quickly. But this is absolutely horrific, and the British public should make sure that these two's faces are remembered when they are released from prison. There are so many more details that I couldn't get into because it's so graphic, like the fact that Kaylee was found with what they called historical injuries, meaning that she had been being abused for a long period of time before her actual death. But regardless, rest in peace to Kaylee Jade. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Murder in America. It's available on all streaming platforms.
nudist resort, 2 deceased victims, and a massive police standoff with a man threatening more destruction. It sounds like a far-fetched film, but this actually happened in California. It was the 29th of August. Police were deeply concerned for the welfare of an elderly couple living in a nudist resort in Redlands, California. Dan and Stephanie Menard, in their 70s, had disappeared from their trailer. Their little dog Cuddles had also vanished. The pair were described as wonderful, warm people, and it was completely out of character for them to just vanish. They were long time their car had been discovered with the key in the ignition, and it had just been abandoned. Then a disturbing call came into the police. The call said they were a family member of a man named Michael Sparks. Now, he also lived at the resort, and turned out he was their next door neighbour. Apparently confessed to killing an elderly couple, although he didn't admit that it was this elderly couple, and was threatening to unalive himself. Officers locked down the entire community and got a loudhailer and were trying to make contact with Michael, but had no luck. Then, more news. Police heard that Michael had apparently barricaded himself into his property with weapons. A huge police standoff began, and officers had to send a drone in to examine the property. However, even with the use of the drone, they still couldn't see if Michael was actually inside. They ended up getting an armoured police vehicle to literally ram down the front of the property. Turns out Michael was in fact inside and had tried to unalive himself with a rifle, but it had misfired. He was detained and taken into custody and is charged with 2 counts of murder. On Michael's property, a grim discovery was made. There were bags of what was deemed to be human remains that were tragically identified as the missing couple. A coroner determined they had died from blunt force trauma, but it is not known what the motive was. Sadly, no one knows where their dog Cuddles is.
Obviously, weird things that people see in the Appalachian Mountains. People say skinwalkers, wendigos. I don't know if you know what a wendigo is.
Yeah, I do.
Do you know how it looks like?
I don't know how it looks like, but I know that they have so much hunger that it can't be satisfied.
Specifically for human flesh, that it can't be satisfied. The concept of a wendigo comes from a different indigenous groups in North America. The stories that were told from them are completely different from what we've seen nowadays. Although the depiction of the wendigo is accurate in the sense of there were once humans who had turned into cannibals, and it's more also transformation of the soul, basically lose your humanity. Their skin would become gray, they would have no lips, they would have cuts on their bodies, they had gaunt, emaciated faces, and the smell of rotting flesh would linger because of their skin. Their skin would be deteriorating to the point where you could see their bones. It didn't matter who they would eat a family member, a friend, as long as it satisfied their needs. And then why they decided to eat humans: if you were a hunter and you had no animal to eat, or if it was wintertime, there was barely any animals to catch, they will resort to eating human flesh. And then from then on, you would get banished from your tribe. This is what people think a wendigo looks like, that you probably have seen before.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
That's how a wendigo is supposed to look like. Yeah, I know the game Until Dawn, they did like a really good, accurate depiction of what a wendigo is.
These are the most disturbing videos on TikTok, and this is a massive trigger warning. In February 2022, a TikToker by the name of Beanbag Adventures arrived at a structure that seemed completely abandoned. Locally, this place was known as the lavatory. Upon entering the building, Beanbag Adventures was completely overwhelmed by a very strong odor, despite the respiratory he was wearing. So he followed the stench, and it led him down to the basement and into a strange room, and it's there that he would make a disturbing discovery. A pool of stagnant liquid containing the remains of children, and not just children, we are talking about newborn babies. Now, at first, when the video was released, there was a debate about how real the footage was. As he said in the video, he found movie props. But that was likely an attempt to prevent the graphic footage from being deleted. But having seen the video, it's pretty convincing and would have to have been very costly to fake. Another indication of its authenticity is that in the high-quality footage, maggots and insects are clearly on and around the bodies. After he posted the first video, he went back to business as usual, but in December 2022, he went back, and what he captured silenced most of the doubters. Because this time, things changed. There was children's clothes scattered all on the floor, and a pile of glass bottles appeared, and within the pool itself were even more corpses. And many bodies that were recognizably the same were now further decomposed than before. This was either a very well put together hoax or it was real. Many people were even quick to discover that the bottles found appeared to be formaldehyde, a chemical used for the preservation of bodies. After the second video went viral, many believed that there was a serial killer on the loose or a group of killers, but others were still convinced it was a trick. Now, I obviously can't show the video on blurred, but it's not hard to find it at all if you want to watch it. So if you decide to watch it, let me know your thoughts on it and if you think it's real. Nonetheless, this video is absolutely disturbing, and it's definitely one of the most disturbing videos on TikTok that I've seen. Also, if you guys have any suggestions on videos you want me to cover on TikTok, just let me know.
I don't think I will ever recover after learning about what happened to Annalise Michel and listening to the audio tapes of her exorcism. On July 1st, 1976, 23-year-old Annalise Michel would die after undergoing 67 exorcisms over the span of 10 months for demonic possession. What she experienced leading up to her death is horrifying. So Annalise lived in West Germany with her 3 sisters and parents, and they grew up very religious as Roman Catholics, and they went to Mass twice a week. When she was 16 years old, she suddenly blacked out at school and walked around in a trance-like state. Her parents didn't quite understand why, but a year later, she blacked out once again. She was in bed this time and woke up in another trance-like state, having wet the bed. Her parents then took her to the doctor, where she was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. She was then put on a string of medication to try and treat both, but nothing worked. And she was eventually also diagnosed with depression. By 20 years old, Annalise's mental condition got even worse, and it was at this point that she refused to be around anyone or anything religious. In 1970, she had a devastating third seizure, and after this, she started seeing the devil everywhere she went, and she would hear voices telling her that she was damned and that she was going to rot in hell. After 5 years of no improvement on medication, Annalise and her parents began to think that she was possessed by a demon. So they appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism, but initially they were rejected. They lost all hope in traditional doctors and medication, and eventually they stopped going to the doctor altogether. But in that time frame, Annalise's behavior grew more and more terrifying. She became incredibly aggressive and would hurt herself. She drank her own urine and would eat insects and crawl under tables. It got so bad that she even barked like a dog for 2 days, would compulsively do up to 400 squats a day, and even bit the head off of a dead bird. She would then resort to growling and was then taken to a commune. During her time there, she couldn't even be in the same room as a crucifix, and she would refuse to drink holy water. When she would walk up to the shrine, she physically couldn't enter because she said that the soil burned like fire and she couldn't take it any longer. Annalise said that when she looked around at the others praying, it looked like they were gnashing their teeth at her. It was there that she was determined to be suffering from demonic possession. In 1975, the family finally got approval from a local bishop to begin performing exorcisms, but this was ordered to be in total secrecy. The exorcisms would be performed by 2 priests and started in late September of 1975. Over the next 10 months, Annalise would be subjected to 1 or 2 exorcisms a week, and those would last up to 4 hours long. In total, she underwent 67 exorcisms, and the audio tapes from them are terrifying.
Aber das Ding, das Gebesamt, die Drecksau, die ist an ihn eingepflanzt. Ja, ja!
So müssen wir zeigen, dass das
During these exorcisms, Annalise said that she was possessed by these 6 demons, and one thing that she said will forever haunt me. She said, quote, "People are as stupid as pigs. They think it's all over after death. It goes on," end quote. These exorcisms were so violent that she broke both of her knees and had ripped the tendons from continually kneeling in prayer. She also began refusing to eat food. On July 1st, 1976, 10 months after the first exorcism, Annalise died. Her official cause of death was from malnutrition and dehydration. She was in a state of near starvation for nearly a year, and she weighed only 66 pounds. Because of the state she was in, Annalise's parents and the 2 priests performing the exorcisms were arrested, and their case went to trial. At the trial, doctors argued that Annalise wasn't ever possessed, and that the manifestations of demonic possession were a psychological effect of her strict religious upbringing and her epilepsy. The defense argued that nothing they did was illegal, and in court, they played the audio tapes from the exorcisms to prove that she was indeed possessed. They also said that Annalise was finally freed of demonic possession right before she died. It was proven that her death could have been prevented, and all parties were found guilty of negligent homicide. The priests were sentenced to 6 months in jail, but that was later reduced to 3 years probation and having to pay a fine. Although her parents were found guilty, under German law, they weren't charged because they'd already suffered enough. Several years after the exorcism of Anneliese Michel, the Catholic Church took back the claim that she was ever possessed. I first learned about this case after watching this movie, which is loosely based on Anneliese, and the movie still, to this day, scares me so bad. This is actually the only topic that I am genuinely scared to talk about. Like, it is such bad energy.
This grown man dated a 12-year-old and then they killed her entire family. It was 2006 in Alberta in Canada. Jasmine Richardson was a 12-year-old girl who lived at home with her mum, her dad, and her little brother Tyler. Now, initially, Jasmine was a straight A student. She was really popular, people described her as very bright, and she loved socializing and spending time with friends. Now, as most children do, Jasmine grew up to kind of experiment with her clothes and her hairstyles and things, and almost like developed into this goth/emo phase. However, this phase would turn darker than anyone would imagine. In February that year, Jasmine met a man named Jeremy Steinck at a local shopping centre. Now, he was actually a lot older than her at 23 years of age. However, he claimed to be a 300-year-old werewolf. In just a couple of months, things would escalate to a devastating degree. Jeremy had a dark past. His mum had struggled with substance issues, and she and her boyfriends and people she would bring into the house would abuse Jeremy. Now, this is by no means an excuse or a reason why he eventually ended up not only dating a child, but also the horrific crimes he would go on to commit. Now, both Jeremy and Jasmine started expressing extreme anger towards their parents. This was despite Jasmine actually having a fairly nice upbringing. They started hanging out more and more, and Jasmine got way more rebellious and started doing poorly at school. Now, Jasmine also started to resent her little brother, and on some occasions was asked to babysit him and ended up just leaving him in the house on his own. Her parents were understandably concerned about her, so they started doing a little bit of digging on her computer to see what on earth she was doing on there. They ended up finding messages between the 12-year-old and the adult Jeremy. They were obviously really horrified by this and banned her from speaking to Jeremy and also grounded her. They thought they were keeping their little girl safe. Little did they know they were just pushing them closer together and making them more angry. In April that year, they concocted a sickening plan, which they carried out on the 23rd of the month. That morning, Jeremy arrived at the family house, both under the influence of alcohol and substances. He was armed with knives and had a mask over his face. He snuck inside the house, but Deborah heard something and went downstairs to investigate. Suddenly, she came across Jeremy, and before she knew what on earth had happened, he had lunged at her, stabbing her several times. Mark, the dad, then came downstairs and he'd armed himself with a screwdriver by now. He managed to launch it at Jeremy's eye. However, Jeremy did stab Mark too, and unfortunately, he passed away as well. The little brother was terrified at this point and was actually upstairs and could hear everything that was going on. There are mixed accounts of what happens next. Jeremy said that Jasmine did the next part, and Jasmine said that Jeremy did the next part. One of them ended up stabbing and killing the little brother Tyler. Jeremy then fled the absolute bloodbath in his car, and Jasmine got to work cleaning the knife. She then stole her deceased mum's credit card and got a taxi to where Jeremy was staying. Once reunited, they had S, or essentially Jeremy R'd this child. They then just casually went to a house party, knowing that the family members lay deceased in the family home. It's alleged that at the party they bragged about the killings, and Jeremy showed off his eye injury. Horrifically, the following day, a little boy went to the house to try and play with Tyler, and when he knocked on the door, he noticed something through the window. It looked like a body. He obviously immediately alerted his mum, who rang police. Police showed up and found the horrific crime scene and realised that the girl from the house was missing. They put out an Amber Alert to try and find her. Meanwhile, she and Jeremy hid. They were eventually tracked down at a convenience store and were apprehended. Now, Jeremy was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and eventually was given life in prison, but Jasmine was not tried as an adult and only got 10 years. She was released from prison in 2016 and is now a free woman.
The woman you just saw in that video leading the class, 26-year-old Reagan Gray, turned out to be a pedophile. Just last month, Reagan was arrested for having an inappropriate relationship with one of the 15-year-olds that she was in charge of at her church. At the time of the abuse, Reagan was teaching at the Little Rock Christian Academy and volunteered for her church Emmanuel Baptist student ministry. So basically, Reagan tried her hardest to work around as many children as possible. Who knows what kind of horrific thoughts were running through her mind at all times when she was around these kids. Reagan, before her arrest, was a woman of God, someone who devoted her life to living a pure, holy life. But in 2020, the parents of a student allegedly found text messages between his teacher and himself. Keep in mind, he was a minor. They confronted Reagan about it. She said she would cut off all communication with the kid, and she insisted that it had never been physical. However, in a counseling session in 2023, Gray herself admitted that the relationship had been physical and sexual. And after she ratted on herself, an arrest affidavit was secured, and she was eventually arrested. Now, the teenage victim would actually state that Reagan would send him naughty photographs every single day while they were communicating. They also said that they kept their activity to only stuff using the mouth because she said that she and the student needed to stay pure, which is just disgusting. But this church has had a lot of scandals this year. The same church in March of this year revealed that the children's former assistant children's program director, a man named Patrick Stephen Miller, had had an inappropriate relationship with 2 young girls, and he had assaulted them while they were inside of the church. Hopefully the legal system hands this woman a punishment that goes along with the severity of this crime. But in America, you really never know. She'll probably get 2 years and be out on the street again to victimize more young children. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms like Apple Podcasts. One of P. Diddy's favorite groups to victimize was young children, and they were as young as 9 years old. Yes, in a lawsuit filed last month, a 9-year-old boy accused P. Diddy of graping him, as well as a slew of other charges. There's also a group of dozens of minors who are suing P. Diddy, alleging they were abused as well. And as this thing just continues to balloon and explode, I'm sure there's going to be dozens, if not hundreds more children that come forward with these horror stories about what this man did to them. But why did no one listen to these kids? How come nobody heard a single thing? Nobody saw anything. I mean, it's really disturbing. Interviews with people who have attended Diddy's parties also keep coming out, including an interview that was just released today, in which a woman named Tania Wallace claims that I saw children dressed up in Barbie outfits during a P. Diddy freak-off party. I mean, what the I mean, it's just incredibly disturbing. And clearly, P. Diddy was tied or connected to people that enabled this behavior, whether these people were contacts in the United States government or in the Hollywood elite. But he was allowed to do these things for a very, very long time. And keep in mind, he had hundreds, if not thousands of victims that never spoke out for some reason or another. I wonder why that is. Actually, I'll tell you why, and it's my theory, is that P. Diddy was a blackmail agent, kind of like the notorious Jeffrey Epstein. And the United States authorities viewed him as a blackmail bank, meaning that he had blackmail on all these celebrities, all these different people that he was involved with, and they could harvest and harness that blackmail to use for some sort of political gain or means. And in return, they would give P. Diddy pretty much immunity across the board. That is until the first victim started speaking their mind and making all of this public. And in these cases, when one domino falls, all of them fall. But this isn't the end. And if you want to hear me cover stories like this, listen to my podcast, The Conspiracy Files, on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also watch the video version on YouTube. And in the next few weeks, I'm doing a Diddy documentary. I have access to some Diddy materials that have never been seen by the public, and it's going to get very, very disturbing.
This is the Brazilian beach murder, one of the worst things I've ever covered explained. The case that I'm about to explain to you is one of the worst from Brazil, and this murder was described by the Brazilian media as a deranged crime of passion fueled by jealousy and the desire for revenge. The crime took place on the 25th of June 2019 in Brazil. 2 teenagers who were 15 at the time teamed up to kill a fellow teenager who was 14 to 15. The pair also recorded the horrific crime and uploaded it to social media. But what makes this case even more shocking is that this occurred in broad daylight, in a well-populated area, which resulted in numerous witnesses and the capture of the two murderous teens. The victim's family then went to identify the body, and they revealed that one of the murderers had a relationship with the victim and was not happy with how it ended at all, which resulted in months of cyber stalking and threats. After moving on from this relationship, the victim would start talking to a local boy. However, her becoming involved with a new partner, which seemed to push her ex over the edge. More and more threats came, and on the 25th of June 2019, the victim was walking home from school when she was located by her ex and his new partner. And she was then taken to the beach and murdered plain in sight of onlookers. And due to the age of the killers, the trial and sentencing was kept from the public eye. But now, what I'm about to explain to you is the video that the two killers posted to social media, and this is a massive, massive trigger warning, and I advise you to never go searching for it. As you play the video, you are met with the sight of two teenagers, one of which is female and the other is the ex-partner of the victim. And they are standing over the poor teenager who has already been subjected to a beating as her shirt is covered in blood. They are at the beach and the female can be seen dragging the victim by the hair into the sea while beating her with her free hand. The person filming is the ex-partner of the victim and can be heard saying, "Are you sorry now? Are you sorry now?" The victim is then dragged into the ocean and lets out one of the worst screams you will ever hear. The girl who dragged the victim into the ocean then attempts to drown her by holding her head under the water. This continues for a while. The victim has her head plunged underwater while being held down, before having her head raised back above the surface. At one point, her head is held under the water for almost a minute straight. And due to her injuries, as the tide flows in and out, you see streaks of blood in the water. The victim is then raised above the surface and punched in the face multiple times. The person filming, who is the victim's ex-partner, then gets a kitchen knife and stabs the victim multiple times in the hand and the back of the neck. After this, the girl then resumes trying to drown the victim as her ex-partner can be heard screaming, "Drown her, drown her." They fail at drowning her because of the tide and bring her to a rock in the sea and then try to bash her head against it. The person filming then gets the knife and stabs the victim again multiple times. This time, however, the stab wounds were way more severe as the water around the victim turns much bloodier. The victim at this point then sadly dies and her body is dragged out of the sea, and you then hear people in the distance and they confront the two teen killers. Multiple people arrive, stopping them from leaving, and they ask the killers what they did to the girl. And they then said they killed her for betrayal. And this is where the video concludes. What makes this case even worse is the killers will barely be punished due to the laws in Brazil surrounding these types of cases. This case is extremely depressing and traumatic, and it's definitely one of the most sickening ones I've covered. May that young girl rest in peace. She did not deserve that at all.
She was strangled to the point that her neck was broken by her teacher, who then left her for dead in the woods. He was recently released from prison, and the video of them finding her is absolutely horrifying. This is the disturbing case of Ashley Reeves. On April 27th, 2006, 17-year-old Ashley Reeves told her parents that she was going to a job interview. So she took her boyfriend's car and then left her Belleville, Illinois home. But in all reality, Ashley was actually going to meet up with 26-year-old Samson Shelton, who at the time was a driver's ed teacher, but he had previously been a teacher at her middle school. Unbeknownst to everyone, the two had been having an intimate relationship together. At least that's what Samson says. What he was actually doing was grooming and abusing her since she was a minor. So when a few hours passed and Ashley never came home, her parents immediately reported her missing to the police. They then found the car Ashley was driving abandoned on the side of the road, and in it were the clothes that she was supposed to be wearing to the job interview. At this point, everyone knew that Ashley was in danger, so her mom started combing through her phone records to see who she'd been talking to in the days leading up to her disappearance. One number stood out, and it belonged to Samson. So when her mom called him, Samson said that he had no idea where Ashley was and hung up on her. At this point in time, he was line dancing at a country bar. Friends of Ashley's came forward and told police that she'd been seeing an older man and had planned to meet him the night she disappeared. This was enough evidence to bring Samson in for questioning, which is exactly what the police did. It would take 12 hours of interrogating for him to begin confessing, but at first he admitted that he was with her the day she went missing. But he said that they had had an argument while he was driving, and he kicked her out of the car. car, leaving her behind. He said he didn't do a single thing to hurt her. A few more hours would go by before he confessed to everything. He admitted to having an intimate relationship with Ashley, but said that she was persistent and that she was the one who pursued him for a long time. He then admitted to having an argument the day she went missing while they were driving. He said he tried to end things with her and she got mad, so he put her in a chokehold, which ended up breaking her neck. Sampson said that her whole body went limp, and in a panic, he dumped her body in a wooded area in Citizens Park. He said that he wanted to make it look like she had been strangled in the woods. So to emphasize this, he put his belt around her neck and strangled her repeatedly. At one point, he was pulling the belt so tight around her neck that it actually broke. Thinking she was dead, he left her in the woods and then went line dancing at the country bar. This is when he spoke to Ashley's mom on the phone. She was looking for her daughter and he had just gotten done brutally strangling her. Yet he decided to go line dancing, not having a single care in the world. So Sampson told police where Ashley's body was, and when they went looking for her, they fully expected her to be dead. After 40 minutes in the pouring rain and complete darkness, police stumbled across Ashley's body, but somehow she was still alive, even after having her neck broken and being strangled repeatedly. On top of that, she was left alone in the woods with her injuries for 30 hours, but she was alive. Authorities didn't think she was going to survive because she suffered severe brain trauma from the attack, but she did. She spent the next year relearning how to swallow, walk, and talk, and although she doesn't remember much from that day, she is alive. Sampson was then arrested, where he pleaded guilty to attempted murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but he was released a couple of months ago after having only served 17. He was given the earliest possible release allowed by the law, which is just crazy to me. He is clearly a danger to society. He will spend the next 3 years on parole and is banned from having any contact with Ashley. I feel like this isn't justice, and I can't even imagine how Ashley feels knowing that he is a free man. He hasn't shown any remorse, and even during the interrogation, he only cared about himself. He literally asked the detective if he would have a private toilet in prison because he can't pee in front of anyone else. Meanwhile, Ashley was laying there, slowly dying. What he did was deranged, and everyone in Illinois should know his face and be careful around him.
Disturbing episode of La Rosa de Guadalupe. Ooh. This episode was about Justin Bieber, right? Really? Justin Bieber was going to be in Monterrey, Mexico. And a lot of people were going crazy over Justin Bieber tickets. Like all the
This man was swallowed in his sleep by a sinkhole. On February 28, 2013, just before midnight, the quiet town of Seffner, Florida was shattered by a nightmare that still haunts many to this day. 37-year-old Jeff Bush had just gone to bed, unaware that a hidden danger lay directly beneath him. Without warning, the ground beneath his bedroom collapsed, creating a massive sinkhole that stretched 20 feet across and at least 50 feet deep. In seconds, Jeff and everything around him was gone, completely swallowed by the sinkhole with no chance to escape. Hearing the chaos, Jeff's brother Jeremy raced into the room. He saw nothing but a gaping hole where Jeff's bed had been moments before. Desperate, Jeremy tried to pull him out, risking his own life, but it was too late. Jeff was sadly dead. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but the ground continued to crumble, making it too dangerous for anyone to go in after Jeff. And after hours of searching, it was clear that Jeff would never be recovered. The sinkhole was too unstable and too deep. Sadly, Jeff's body was never recovered.
Jacqueline Durant, she was a dog sitter. Her face was nearly erased by a dog sitting job gone wrong.
Oh, wait, I think I saw this.
A couple of days before, she had visited the dogs. The dogs had the normal, not aggressive. Their names were Lucy, a German Shepherd mix, and Bender, which was a Boxer Pit Bull mix. And they were both rescue dogs. Owners had promised Jacqueline that the dogs would have been caged when she would arrive, so she wouldn't have to worry about them being aggressive. But when the day came, the owners had texted Jacqueline saying that they failed to put them in the cages or whatever. So whenever Jacqueline arrived, as soon as she opened the door, the dogs attacked her. They dragged her into the living room. They tore off her ears, her nose, her lips. They bit her 800 different times all over her body, bro. And there's body cam footage of the cops arriving to the scene. It took them 37 minutes to finally find the opening.
We can't make entry because of the dogs. Ma'am, can you hear me? Are you the only one inside? There's a big dog right next to you?
So they rushed her to the hospital, lost 30% of her blood, and she was resuscitated multiple times. To make this shit more fucked up was the owners, they had a sign in front of the door that said, "Warning, crazy dogs, do not knock or don't ring the doorbell."
Why would they let her try to dog sit those dogs?
Because
bro?
apparently he said that we have children in the house. They never showed no signs of being aggressive.
I have 3 kids, you know, one's 3 years old. No history of violence, none.
If they're well behaved, why would they have that?
It's the way you are. That's our song.
The happy couple left the reception under a canopy of sparklers.
On their beginning of the golf cart ride, she said, "I wish this night could go on forever. The best night of life."
Sam and Eric.
Just a few hours after the wedding ended, the bride would be dead. On April 28, 2023, this woman, Samantha Miller, married her favorite person in the world, Eric Hutchinson. The two had dated for a very long time and were super excited to finally tie the knot. So after months of preparation, the two finally got married in April of 2023. It was a beautiful ceremony and procession according to everyone who attended, and the couple was sent off with this amazing sparkler display. But just moments after leaving the wedding in a low-speed vehicle, they were struck from behind by a driver speeding in another car. Unfortunately, it was a devastating crash, and shortly after the crash, Samantha Miller would be pronounced dead on her own wedding night. The driver of the other vehicle was Jamie Lee Komorowski. Jamie had been speeding 65 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone, and her blood alcohol level was 3 times over the legal limit. It was her reckless driving that ended Samantha Miller's life. Eerily, Jamie's Instagram is still up, and her last post, posted 4 days before the accident, said, "Did someone say tequila?" I mean, it's just disturbing. This is obviously a horrific story, and I hope that there's justice at the end of the day, and that Jamie gets used to the inside of a prison cell. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
Could a teenager have accidentally burned to death inside of an oven at Walmart? Something hideous happened on the 19th of October this year at Walmart in Canada. Now, the shop had apparently been looking to remove the walk-in ovens from the stores, but before they were able to, tragedy would strike. Gurisman Kaur, aged 19, moved to Canada 2 years ago with her mum from India. The pair both worked at the Walmart store, and on the day in question, the girl's mum realised she hadn't been able to get hold of her in a while. It had been roughly an hour, so she went looking and tried to investigate. After looking high and low, her mum eventually discovered her daughter's body locked in an oven. A frantic call came into emergency services, and a dispatch officer told them, "Female is locked in an oven in the bakery. Oven is on, unsure if the staff are able to turn it off." Rosemary was removed from the oven, but tragically it was too late. Her mum was obviously completely traumatized by this whole situation, and it remains somewhat a mystery how she even ended up there in the first place. Walmart employees have posted videos online claiming that the whole situation is really strange. They have stated there would be no way that she would get in of her own accord, and some have claimed that the door is really hard to open. There were apparently no tasks that would ever require anyone to actually physically get inside of the oven. One employee stated, "You have to push with all your might to pull the handle to the side and lock it in place." They added, "There is no way possible that someone could lock themselves in there."
I really have no words for this. Joseph Fritzl, the man who imprisoned his own daughter for 24 years, repeatedly sexually assaulted her, and had 7 children with her, is being released to a regular prison. This is a big deal for many reasons, and it's really scary. So for the past 15 years, Joseph has been in a high security unit for mentally disturbed patients at Stein Prison in Krems, Austria. This is because in 2008, it was discovered that he had been holding his daughter Elizabeth captive in a makeshift prison chamber in the basement of the family home. I'll go more into detail about what took place in just a second. But basically, in 1984, when Elizabeth was 18 years old, her dad Joseph lured her into the basement of their Amstetten home and into a soundproof bunker that he built. Over the next 24 years, he would repeatedly sexually assault her, resulting in him fathering 7 children with her. This would all come to light in 2008 when one of their babies became sick and needed urgent medical attention. When he took the baby to the hospital, the doctor became suspicious and alerted authorities, who then asked for the baby's mom to come forward. So Joseph released Elizabeth from the bunker, and she was then able to tell authorities how she'd been held captive for the past 24 years, and Joseph was ultimately arrested. At the time of her rescue, Elizabeth was 42 years old. Joseph was sentenced in 2009 to life in prison after being convicted of incest, 3,000 instances of sexual assault, false imprisonment, negligent homicide of one of the children, and a bunch of other charges. After a psychological evaluation deemed him extremely psychologically abnormal, he was then transferred to spend his sentence in that high-security unit for mentally disturbed patients in Creey. It's now been 15 years, and after a recent psychiatric assessment, he was granted release to a regular prison. The verdict was based on the fact that he's now 88 years old and reportedly has dementia and no longer poses a danger to society. As a condition, he will need to attend regular psychotherapy every 3 months over the next 10 years as part of a probation period. But this is a big deal for many reasons, and it's incredibly alarming. His lawyer, Astrid Wagner, is actually pushing for his release to be into a nursing home and not a regular prison. She's working on his early release into the public as we speak. According to Austrian law, those who are sentenced to life in prison are potentially eligible for parole after 15 years. And in Joseph's case, that would be March of this year. His lawyer Astrid just stated, quote, "He regrets what he did and he was actually close to tears. Based on Joseph's recent evaluation, I wouldn't be frightened to move in with him in a flat share arrangement. He no longer poses a sex drive." End quote. Just her statement alone is disgusting. And I know he's 88 now and has dementia, but let me tell you why this is so alarming. As I explained earlier, that day in 1984, he lured his daughter Elizabeth into the basement of the family home under the pretense that he needed help installing a door. Unknown to Elizabeth, he had built a makeshift prison chamber in the style of a Cold War bunker. And once she helped him install the door, he rendered her unconscious and locked her inside. What's absolutely crazy about this case is that Joseph lived with his wife and other children upstairs, and they were all reportedly unaware of the horrors taking place in the basement. A little while after Elizabeth disappeared, her mom filed a missing persons report, but Joseph told friends, family, and the police that she ran away to join a cult. He would then force Elizabeth to write letters from the basement telling everyone that she was okay and not to look for her. Over the next 24 years, he repeatedly sexually assaulted her, which resulted in him fathering 7 children with her, 3 of which he also held in captivity with Elizabeth, while the others he brought upstairs to raise with his wife and other children. One of the children held in captivity with Elizabeth died shortly after birth because Joseph failed to get them medical attention. That baby was cremated by Joseph. Joseph told his wife that the 3 children he brought up just so happened to be placed on their doorstep. After he was arrested, Joseph initially told police that what he did to Elizabeth was consensual, not sexual assault. But then he stated that he always knew it wasn't right, it just became normal. But despite that, he said that he always treated Elizabeth and the kids in captivity well by bringing them flowers and toys. He also initially stated that he felt compelled to imprison Elizabeth because she wouldn't follow the rules, but he ultimately admitted to locking her up for his own gratification. He went on to say, quote, "I was born to RAPE. I held myself back for a very long time. I could have behaved a lot worse than locking up my daughter." End quote. Joseph also admitted to locking his own mother in the attic of that same family home. He boarded up all of the windows and told neighbors that his mom had died, but in reality, she was likely locked in that attic for nearly 20 years until her death in 1980. If all of this is not alarming enough, Joseph also had an extensive criminal history prior to this. In 1967, Joseph broke into the home of a 24-year-old nurse and sexually assaulted her while holding a knife up to her throat, threatening to kill her if she screamed. He only served 1 year in prison for that crime and had his criminal history expunged after 15 years due to Austrian law. Adding to this, Joseph is also suspected of several murders. The first is the murder of 17-year-old Martina Claudia Posch, who disappeared on November 12, 1986. Her body was found 10 days later in a lake, and her cause of death was strangulation. At the time of her murder, Joseph ran a guest house near where her body was found, and she really resembled his daughter Elizabeth. He's also suspected of murdering 17-year-old Anna Newmayer, who was killed on August 17, 1966. She disappeared within 20 miles of where Joseph worked at the time. Then there's the murder of 42-year-old Gabriela Supkova, who was killed in 2007. Her body was found in the exact same location where Joseph was conveniently on vacation. Although he's suspected of these murders, he's never been formally charged due to lack of evidence. So, like I said, I know he's old now and has dementia, but Joseph is an evil person, and I personally don't think he should ever be released back into society. And I can't believe that this is even a thing with everything that he's done. What are your thoughts on this?
Charles Manson, since he was young, he started doing some crazy shit. When he was 9 years old, he actually got charged with arson. He lit his elementary school on fire.
What?
When he was 18 years old, he ended up taking advantage of some kid with a knife. Most of his life, he was in jail. He ended up moving to California, right? Hippie culture was big over there.
Yeah.
Somehow, he used his charm and shit and the fact that he played music to like associate with these people. He ended up making like a little group. Although it was like a hippie group, he hated that word. So he called it a slippy group. Yeah. And it was because of how they would slip into people's houses and steal shit, which was a cult. And later on, it was called the Manson family. He had this weird obsession and this weird thought in his mind that eventually there was going to be this war, a race war between blacks and whites. And it was mainly because a song by the Beatles called Helter Skelter, he got inspiration from it. He said that when he heard that song, it spoke to him. Then I'm going to show you an interview of just how crazy he actually was.
I can do anything I want to you people at any time I want to, because that's what you've done to me. If you spit in my face and smack me in the mouth and throw me in solitary confinement for nothing, what do you think's going to happen when I get out of here? Maybe I should have killed 400 or 500 people. Then I would have felt better. Then when I felt like I really offered society something. You know, if I wanted to kill somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing. Are you mad? Do you feel like Welcome back to
my channel. Welcome back to another video. If this is your first time here, or if it's your first time watching my videos, hi.
The woman you just saw in that video murdered her own daughter with the help of 2 family members because she believed that her daughter was possessed by a demon. This is Claudia Hernandez. In September of 2021, Claudia thought her 2-year-old daughter Arlie was acting weird. According to her, her daughter's eyes changed. They were vacant and empty. She claimed that her daughter's voice wasn't her own, and she said that she knew she was possessed by a demon. Claudia told investigators, "I knew it was a demon because I go to church." So at one point, Claudia put her fingers into her daughter's mouth to try force her to vomit, and when she did that, her daughter bit down on her. She claimed that's when she knew this was a possession, and so she brought her daughter into a church. Claudia then got her brother and her father to meet them at the church, and they performed an exorcism on the little girl. An exorcism that lasted over 20 hours, where the 3 of them were putting their hands around the girl's neck, choking her out, abusing her, holding her up in the air, throwing her around, screaming at her. And heartbreakingly, even when Arlie told her own mother, "I love you," as she was dying, Claudia claimed that that was a demon. Now, that video I showed you at the beginning of this was actually posted after Claudia had murdered her daughter. Yeah, she thought she'd start up a YouTube channel after killing her kid. Obviously, that didn't end up going too well because she was arrested. And this story is flat out disturbing. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
This boy did to a child is absolutely horrific, and he may soon be released from prison. It was the summer of 2015 in Santa Cruz, California. Maddie Middleton was a sweet 8-year-old girl who lived in an affordable housing complex with her mum. Now, Maddie would regularly play outside in the summertime like loads of other children would. Disturbingly though, she then vanished. When she wasn't home by 6:30 that evening, her mum started to panic and went round all of the local houses knocking on the door asking if anyone had seen her daughter. Unfortunately, there was no news and she had to get the FBI involved. Now, they started scouring the local area and looking everywhere, horrifically even in like the recycling bins. That's when they noticed they were being watched. 15-year-old Adrian Gonzalez was just sort of stood by watching them and asking them strange questions about the crime. To make matters worse and even more suspiciously, as soon as they recovered a body from the recycling bins, he started sprinting off. They detained him while his mum watched on in horror. The police expected him to just say nothing, and actually what they got was a horrifying confession. He stated that he had lured the little girl into his apartment with an ice cream. He then duct taped her mouth shut and SA'd the child. He then brutally stabbed her and strangled her to death before dumping her in a recycling bin. Now, he was charged as an adult despite being 15 at the time and was charged with murder but pleaded not guilty. The Supreme Court eventually overturned the fact that he was going to be charged as an adult, and he was sentenced to spend some time in a juvenile facility. It was determined he would remain there until he was 25, which was this year. As far as I can see, it's still being decided whether he's going to be released or not.
This is Travis the chimp, one of the worst animal attacks ever recorded, explained. This is Travis the chimp, and he lived with Sandra and Jerome Harold since he was a young chimp, and was often treated like a member of the family, but one day something happened. He exhibited unusually aggressive behavior, which made the Harolds call their friend Nash for assistance. But when Nash arrived at the Harolds' home, Travis the chimp suddenly attacked her. And the attack was extremely gruesome. Travis the chimp targeted Nash's face and hands. It ripped off both of her eyelids and then proceeded to rip her nose clean off, blinding her and also severing several parts of her body and lacerating her face. Travis the chimp was then shot and killed by police who arrived at the scene. But Nash's injuries were so severe that she had to undergo a face transplant and lost both of her hands in an attempt to save her life. But miraculously, she would survive. I would show you pictures of the attack, but they're extremely gruesome and I probably can't show them on here. So instead, I will play the 911 call made by the Harolds as Nash was being attacked by Travis the chimp. And you can hear Travis the chimp in the video going absolutely crazy.
This is the haunting last footage of Kyler Effinger, who died a few weeks ago after crawling into a plane's engine at the Salt Lake City International Airport. On January 1st, 30-year-old Kyler went to the airport to board a flight to Denver to visit his sick grandpa. But as he was checking in, there was a problem with security, which caused him to miss his flight. As you can see in the video, this caused Kyler to become really upset, and he then began using his shoe to try and break one of the airport's windows. After unsuccessfully trying to open multiple locked doors, Kyler then ran to the south end of the airport and managed to kick open a terminal's emergency exit door, which opened up to a stairwell. He's then seen running onto the tarmac as a plane is starting to take off. This all happened at around 10 p.m. that night, and as a result, a store manager inside the airport who witnessed the disturbance called the Salt Lake City police. When authorities arrived, they were given a description of the man and began to search for him, and they eventually found some of the man's clothing and shoes on one of the airport's runways. About 10 minutes into the search, Kyler was spotted at one of the airport's de-icing pads, and he was then seen going underneath the moving plane and into its engine. The plane that was moving was on its way to San Francisco. It was flight number 2348 and it carried 95 passengers. The passengers became terrified as the plane came to a halt and as police sped down the tarmac surrounding the plane. According to some of the passengers, the pilot came on the intercom and said that there was a security event and that the man police were looking for was surrounding them. Authorities asked air traffic controllers to tell the pilot to turn off the plane's engines, but unfortunately, it was too late. Police found Kyler unconscious, partially inside one of the plane's wing-mounted engines, which, although it was turned off, it was still rotating. Authorities began CPR and administered naloxone, but sadly, Kyler was pronounced dead at the scene. And unfortunately, some passengers on the plane witnessed the entire thing. An autopsy will be conducted to determine Kyler's cause and manner of death, and the Salt Lake City Police, as well as the FAA, are still investigating the incident. But according to Kyler's family, his most likely cause of death was due to head trauma, which reportedly happened very fast. Kyler struggled with mental health for nearly a decade after being bullied all throughout school and into college, and he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when he was 20 years old. Kyler's family believes that he was suffering from a mental health episode that night stemming from missing his flight, which likely sent him into a manic episode resulting in his death. Kyler